Good evening. Hello, I'm Barbara Ross, President of the Friends of the Key West Library, introducing tonight's guests. Since this is the last speaker series event of our season, I will spare you the speech about joining or renewing your membership in the Friends, though you definitely should. And we have people in the back who will take your money. I would like to thank the hardworking board of the Friends of the Key West Library for 10 successful speaker events, the staff of the Monroe County Library System in the Key West branch, represented here by Kim Rinaldi, Senior Branch Manager, and well-deserved, very well-deserved, and the staff of Books and Books, represented here by Emily Berg, who will happily send you books at the end of the talk, which I am guessing Chris will be more than happy to sign.
More than happy.
More than happy. Finally, I would like to thank our business sponsors who have shown support for our Little Pink Library from the wider community. I'd especially like to call out our Ruby and Sapphire level sponsors, Preferred Properties, Local Guy Design, Howe Orthodontics, Truman and Company, Fogarty Builders, Michelle's Foundation, It's Social Time Somewhere, the Hellings Curry Museum at the Key West Women's Club, and Public Supermarkets. Now on to the main event. It is my pleasure to introduce tonight's author, Chris Castellani, who will be in conversation with Katrin Schumann. I met Chris and Katrin in 2012 when Chris and I took a class at Grub Street, the premier writing center in Boston, where Chris was then artistic director. Katrin co-led the class, so I've known them a long time. I was already, at that time, a huge fan of Chris's because of his trilogy set in the Apennines during World War II, A Kiss from Magdalena, The Saint of Lost Things, and All This Talk of Love. If you haven't read them, you definitely should. More recently, he is the author of Leading Men, a novel about Tennessee Williams and Frank Merlot, and he's here tonight to talk about the just released Last Scene, and I figure we'll be hearing more about that. Katrin is the author of the Washington Post and Anna John Chart's bestseller, The Forgotten Hours, currently under development as a limited series. This Terrible Beauty, as well as 2 nonfiction books. She is the program coordinator for the Key West Literary Seminar. Please welcome them.
Thank you very much for asking me to chat with Chris. As you heard, we've known each other for a really long time, and it's always so much more fun when you know the person and know them quite well. And we'll talk a little bit about our history, I'm sure, later. But Chris is going to kick us off with a little bit of reading from his book, just so that you get a bit of a feel for what this book is like. So we'll start with that, and we'll end eventually with a few questions. So open it to you.
Such a pleasure to be with you. Thank you all so much for coming. It's amazing to look out and see so many of your beautiful faces in this incredible setting. I love Key West, and I'm so happy to be back with you. Actually, I would say a good 40% of this book was written here, so that, which is weird because it's a book set in the iciest, coldest climates by design, because it's about this. I have to do this little about thing to set it up. Sorry. It's about 4 young men whose bodies were found in various lakes and icy lakes and rivers in New England, the Upper Midwest, and further out. And I came upon this. I started writing this book because back in 2017 I was following a story. I live in Boston. I was following a story about a young man named Michael Kelleher who had gone missing. He went with his friends to a Boston Celtics game, and he seemed perfectly fine at the game, and then just never met back up with his friends and was missing for many weeks. And so I was following the papers, his disappearance, and then finally his body turned up in the Charles River in Boston. And I was reading the comments, and a lot of people were saying, "Oh, it's the smiley face killers, who got him," and it looks like the smiley face case. And I was like, "What is the smiley face case?" And because it had been the 12th body in recent memory that had turned up, and it turned out that the smiley face murder theory is this theory about that there's this roving band of serial killers that are going around in the New England, New England and the upper Midwest, targeting college-aged men and either abducting them or just doing something to them that their bodies end up in these bodies of water. And most of the cases turn out to be solvable in terms of they were drunk and they went to the river to pee and they slipped on a rock and hit their head, or they had natural causes, or there was some personal disagreement. But there are like 25% of these cases that have never been solved, and which allows this theory to persist that there's this roving band of serial killers, because all these guys kind of look alike, which is really creepy. They're mostly white, mostly like athletic, usually good in school, straight acting or straight, and so there is this weird. And I sort of went down the rabbit hole. Like, I just started reading all about this, and other writers have written about this. Bret Easton Ellis, I think, made a movie about this, and I tried to write. I know this is going to probably like collide with all of your questions, but
yeah, I have nothing to do now.
Yeah, no. but I'll elaborate on this when you ask me these questions. It just doesn't make the reading won't make as much sense unless I set this up a little bit. And I tried to write it in a different way. I'll leave it for that. And then it wasn't until I heard a voice. I was walking down the street in Boston, and I sort of heard this voice in my head. And the voice said, "I am one of those boys they keep finding in the river." And I thought, oh, that's the voice. Like, that's who I'm writing about. And I sort of followed that voice, and that's where the book started. So I'll just read from that. Just the first few pages. It's like 5 minutes, so don't panic. I'll just read this first little bit. By the way, smiley face comes from the fact that they call them smiley face killers because apparently there's a smiley face graffito that is painted onto a rock near where these bodies are found all the time, which is super creepy. I don't believe this theory for a second, by the way. That's a whole other thing we can talk about. Okay. I am one of those boys they keep finding in the river. For now, I am floating at the surface of the Huron, somewhere in Ann Arbor, my arms hugging my chest like I'm trying to keep warm, watching the slow progress of clouds through a thick window of ice. I am waiting to be pulled onto shore, delivered into the arms of my mother, to see my name, Matthew Cardulo, in the papers one last time. Not with the words still missing above my senior portrait, but with the dates of my life. December 18th, 1999, February 23rd, 2020. I am waiting to be solved. I am waiting, like you, like everyone, for the end of the story. In the meantime, sunrise, moonrise, rain, helicopters, flashes of birds, the smudged lacrimulae of stars, all of it beautiful and horrible and wild and fucking tedious, same as it was in the before. Day and night as I float and let the current carry me to a place where I will be found, I am listening to the other boys, and when their voices get too loud and annoying, I practice my declensions, lacrimularum, lacrimulis. I was loud too when I got here, kicking my feet as I plunged through the frigid water, screaming and thrashing in the mud at the bottom of the river, trying to wriggle off my heavy coat, calling out to the boys I could hear but not yet see in the blackness. Where was I? What was happening to me? Weeks ago, months, a year? Time does still matter here, even if we have no way to measure it, even though it keeps leaping out of our hands and disappearing in the muck. Like that pet frog I had for a single day when I was 10, Fritzy, I called him. I chased that little fucker up and down Quail Creek, one of those endless summer afternoons you get a million of when you're a kid and never again. And I swear Fritzy made a game out of it, winking back at me before hopping away, turning up behind me somehow, letting me hold him cupped in my chubby hands, and then flying off to a rock in the middle of the creek. Anyway, I'm figuring out that's the slippery way time works for us here, now, like it's teasing us and tricking us, and won't care one bit when it's finally done with us. I'd been writing a paper on Catullus for my junior seminar. I'd been consistently repping 250 on my max bench set. I'd been showing up on time, more or less, to my job at the library circulations desk. I'd been at the Ravens Club, reaping the rewards of my fake ID, hoping Tessa would show up and forgive me and invite me back to her apartment. And then, out of nowhere, I wasn't. I was walking on Packard, checking the side streets for her car, worrying it broke down again and she hadn't charged her phone, like always. And as a last resort, I started to call her friend Chloe, who hated me. And then, like I said, I wasn't. You'd think I'd mind my circumstances more than I do, but for now, I don't. I feel nothing, or at least I feel even less than I used to. And nobody ever accused me of being a person of deep emotions, except in regard to Tessa. Mostly, I'm curious about what's going to happen next. So far, it's not lonely. There are so many of us around, more than 50 now, and that's 50 lives. So there's a lot to talk about. 50 guys times 20-ish years of age, a whole millennium of history to cover. Some of the guys get really confessional. Some never stop crying. Some are just dickheads. Like I said, same as it was in the before. Some are blurrier than others, their bodies almost indistinguishable from the water, and their voices are faint, like the volume on their mics have been turned down. We can't understand them, but we can tell they're shouting, that they know something. The guys like me, who are still clear, still loud, have the most to say, even though we know the least. My mom would say that's typical of men in general. And I'll stop there.
Read a little bit at the end.
I'll do that at the end.
Do that at the end.
Yeah.
Okay.
I've talked enough already. It's your turn.
Okay. So, as was mentioned, Chris and I have known each other for a long time, and I always have to preface any conversation I have with Chris with another thank you. He was the first person to ever hire me to teach. And I stumbled on that email last year, and it was 25 years ago.
Oh my God.
Which really dates us.
Wow.
And it was a very formal email asking you whether I might teach a class, and he said yes, and we never looked back.
No regrets.
Yeah, thankfully.
You're fabulous.
Yes. But so all of Chris's books, I've read all of them, and I would echo Barbara that they are just so good, and they are so different from this book, which I think is really fascinating. And we're not going to spend much time talking about the previous books, but I did want to ask you, given that this one is really a departure, in that it's contemporary, it has some, maybe supernatural elements to it, as you just heard a little bit of. When you look over those years that you spent writing, and you look at your first book and now at this book, how do you see that progression?
Yeah, I mean that is the central question that I keep getting and thinking about as I go around talking about this book, because the 10 people who've read my other books are like, wait, this can't be the same writer, because mainly because of the subject matter, because of anything related to anything true crime or the supernatural, any kind of mystery element. These are not things that I used to write about, and they're not things that I feel like I'm going to keep writing about either, unless the story, unless something inspires me to do that. The sort of through line of each, from the first book to this one, it's going to sound super cheesy, but if you know me, this won't be a surprise, is love. I mean, I fell in love in each book with a character, and it was the character who led me to the story. And again, I won't go through my other books, except to say that the first book was sort of a love letter to my mother, the second book was a love letter to my father, and the third book was kind of a love letter to myself as a child or as a younger person, and kind of the things I wish I could have said or done. And then the last book was a love letter to Frank Merlo, who was Tennessee Williams' partner and who lived around the block from here, whose house I got to see last time I was here. And this book was really, I fell in love with all the characters, but in particular these four young men. And they're all made up, they're all invented, they're not real, they're not based on any real victims, but they take there are all these weird similarities, as I mentioned, to all these smiley face. And every time I say smiley face, by the way, just imagine that I'm putting it in quotes because I don't really believe in it. When I met them through this voice, and this character, Matthew, that I just read, introduced me to the other boys, if that makes any sense. When he got to this place, he kind of met these other guys, and then we all hung out together. And I literally I felt like I was wanting to kind of tap into their brains and their hearts and to kind of just see what made them tick and really think about like young men, college-age men coming of age in 21st century America, what kind of pressures they were under, what expectations they had, the ways in which they'd been socialized, and ultimately also this kind of age-old joke about how men can't communicate, and how bad we are at communicating. I kind of wanted to explore that through their characters. So I think that's the through line, is love, and just really wanting to give these characters kind of the dignity of an inner life, which is kind of what I was also trying to do with Frank Merlo in my last book as well, and for my mother and my father and my young self as well. So
I do have to say, when I read the book, I really wasn't knowing what to expect. And when we went out for cocktails a couple of years ago and you told me the story, I was like, oh, wow, okay, that's really great, It just, and when you...
Be honest, you were like, this sounds like a big mistake.
Well, no, I was impressed, actually. I was impressed because, that it's a bit of a pivot. It feels like a bit of a pivot.
Yeah.
But the truth is, when I read the book, I won't, you haven't presumably read it yet, but when you read the book, I can see how it overlaps with your previous interests and your focus on human relationships and the dignity of individuals and what is the inner life and sort of the nuanced characters.
Exactly.
And I was so
thank you.
Pleasantly surprised. I mean, I wasn't expecting it not to be good. I was definitely expecting it to be good, but I also thought, maybe it's going to be more of a thriller type thing. And there is a sense of mystery that pervades the story. The way that you unfold these characters, and we'll talk about that a little bit because I'm always really interested in craft and how you did that. But just getting these little pieces of information that build to a greater sense of who these young men are, that reminded me a lot of your previous work. What I wondered is, while you were writing it, did it feel like this was such a departure and it was like, were you concerned in any way about how it would be received by your agent or your editor or the reading public or whatever, or did you just sort of go with it and you were like, this is my idea and I think it's really cool and I'm going to go with it?
The latter. I mean, I probably, if I were smart, I would think more about things like, is anybody, what are people going to think of it, or how are we going to market it or whatever, but I never, ever, ever, ever think about that until it's too late, until it's time to, it's already done and we're starting to package it and things like that. I didn't worry about it for 1 second because I knew that if I ever tried to write toward a market or toward an identity or something, I would lose interest and it would just not feel right to me. So I really just had to follow the story and write it the best way I knew how. And what I was going to say earlier was like, my first attempts at this were definitely more thriller-y, right? Even though I don't really read thrillers, I don't I don't know how to write a thriller, but all the early drafts of this, I was like, well, I need to have these thriller tropes in it, even though, again, I wasn't trying to write a thriller. So, like, the first drafts are like, the first scene is like the reporter, shivering in the cold next to a lake, being like, reporting live from the Charles River, it's whatever. And I was like writing, I was like, this is not me, so I really set it aside. And that's when, and I was writing a different book when I heard that voice. I was like, oh, duh, Chris, that's how you write the book, is you do what you always done, is get into the head of the character. It's ridiculous how I didn't see that from the beginning.
One of the questions I was going to ask you was whether there were particular challenges, whether there was anything that surprised you. So I'll jump ahead to that. Anything surprised you when you were writing this book that was unexpected?
Yeah, I mean, everything, really. Honestly, there wasn't a day, and that's what this was by far the most fun I've had writing a book, which is weird to say because it's probably the darkest book I've written, even though I do feel like it has a pretty optimistic ending, and like as optimistic as you can get for four, deceased people. And by the way, it does follow, it's not just, we hear from all four young men, but from the afterlife or whatever, but you also hear directly from, they're all connected to one person who's still alive, and we get their perspective as well. So there are these living characters as well. I guess what surprised me, I think, was the fun. Was just how much it felt like play, and how much it felt like getting back to, like, what used to excite me so much about writing. Was kind of just experimenting and almost not caring. I think I cared more with my other books. To go back to your earlier question about, okay, who am I writing for? What am I doing? Like, and how am I fitting in this tradition or whatever? And I didn't think about that at all for this. I really was just like, I need to do right by these characters. And so yeah.
How did you realize that the initial approach, the sort of thriller approach, wasn't going to work?
I read them. I mean, I literally was reading over and I was like, this is terrible. I mean, I just was like, this is not the right book for me, and I didn't even give them to anyone. I mean, not a ton, maybe 50 pages. I always like, if I can make it to 100 pages, then usually it has enough of like an escape velocity that I can write the whole book. But if I can't get to 100 without being happy, then it usually doesn't work out. And I just knew that, again, it was all from the exterior. It was all about the murders and the bodies, and not about the heart and the soul and the mind. And so that's why for me it didn't work.
At that point, did you already have, what do you call it, the after, or the world that you built for these
Not really,
young men?
no.
You hadn't really conceived of that yet.
No, I wasn't. I was telling it from before they died. Yeah, and that was also the kind of click. Like, once I was like, oh, I have to tell it from their perspective after they have passed. That's what I think really made it all come together. And also that I didn't want to tell it chronologically. Like, this is a very non-linear book. If you don't like reading books that are more of like a jigsaw puzzle or like a mosaic, then this may not be the right book for you, because you do kind of have to, I mean, as like many people have complained on Goodreads, like, not that I read those, but like, it is the kind of book that, like, it's not a spoon-fed kind of book. Like, you do kind of have to pay attention, because there are these little clues that keep dropping, and it's out of order, and I really wanted the reader to meet me halfway, and like, and have us kind of solve the mystery together, and I've likened it to, like, you're putting a jigsaw puzzle together, but you don't have the image that you're as a referent, that's kind of what it's like. I don't know.
It really is such a layered narrative. And I think what's really interesting too is how we hear from the boys themselves and develop a picture about them that feels very honest, and yet then we also hear about these other characters and their versions of them, which we know cannot be, I mean, there is no one single version of any of us. We are all complex.
Exactly.
And so when you read this book, it really is extraordinary how you you carefully layer that. There's this gentle but continuous layering where we get to know them more and more.
I love that. Was such a fun. That was.
I bet that was fun, but I bet that was complicated too, wasn't
Very,
it? So let's talk about that a little bit, because you have 4 dead characters who all have very different voices. I mean, they are young men, but they are very different. And they sound different, and they think differently, and they have different interests, and so on. And then they are each connected to one person in their lives still. They can sort of almost like a ghost, right? They can see what this one person who they love is doing in their lives, and we hear from that person in their point of view as well. Tell me a little bit about that, because that is quite extraordinary to have 8 point of view characters.
Yeah, exactly. And then there's a 9th character who is, we just hear from her in text messages. And that was a change, because I originally had her as well as a 9th character, and then that didn't work. But so we just get her messages. But yeah, I mean, I felt like I couldn't. Part of what the book is about for me is what you said about how we're all these different people at the same time, and I thought the best way that I could illustrate that was to have the person who the guys had the most passionate love relationship with be also the people that we hear from. And they're not all romantic partners. One is a sibling, the other is a mother, the other is a romantic, 2 of the others are romantic partners. And so I really wanted you to get those versions of them, those layers, and also for you not to know there's no real version, because there's no real version of you or me, right? That we're everyone's got their own different versions of themselves and their partners and all that stuff. And so I really wanted to kind of dramatize that in the most dramatic possible way, which is having them be gone and have them, the people who are still alive can't connect with the person who's passed, but the person who's passed can sort of communicate with the person who's alive, but because they're men, they can't figure out quite how to do it, which is again like one thing I was trying to dramatize or whatever. But the one thing I'll say too is like this was part of the fun for me, was when writing, especially when writing the guys sections, I would come home from writing them and and my partner would be like, how'd your writing go? And I would be like, I really think these guys are lying to me, and it was true. Like I was like battling, I was like wrestling. One of them's a wrestler, and I was like wrestling with them, like, because I really was like, I know they're speaking to me, but I don't think they're telling me the truth. And so and I still don't fully know. This may annoy people, but I still don't fully know what's true about them and what's not. I only know what they told me and what I kind of was able to manipulate. But there's still some holes. Hopefully not like actual plot holes in the story, I hope, but like actual things that it could have gone either way, and I don't know exactly the way that it really went.
But that's so true to life.
Exactly, it's true of what I did yesterday.
Definitive answers.
Yeah, right. Exactly.
Rarely.
Exactly. Right.
And I know which character you're talking about, I think, and I was particularly interested in that too. I was like, oh, really?
Yes.
Oh, yeah. I can see that, but is it true?
Yes,
and,
exactly.
That was really good fun.
Thank you.
So, did you feel any one of the 4 was harder or was easier for you to capture? I mean, also in terms of, speak a little bit about capturing their voices.
Yeah.
Did that come easily? Don't tell me it did come easily. I'll have to kill you afterwards. But maybe it did.
I'm sorry it did. Like, it really did, because I've never written in first person before. So all the guys speak in first person, as you heard. Like, I am one of those boys. They each of my friend called their long section. They have these long sections in the middle where they tell their whole life story, and or as much as they're willing to share, or how much of it is true. And my friend called them their soul arias, which I think was like the most beautiful thing that's anyone ever said about this book. But anyway, so they have these arias of the soul that they're bearing, and those weirdly were like, those voices were actually pretty easy to tap into, and I think it was partly because, again, I'd never written in first person before, and I found it so freeing, and I had to definitely fine-tune over and over and over the voices, and I tried to make them similar but not too similar that you'd confuse them, and and I didn't want to make them so different that they felt non-coherent or non-cohesive. So it was challenging, but that's why you have other readers as well who can say, like, this one is coming across this way and it sounds too much like the other one, and I did try to give each of them a real distinct, like something that was different about them, that like was related to their voices but not exact. Like I didn't want to give one of them like a stutter, or like, you know what I mean, like nothing too obvious like that to distinguish them, but they each were so different in their own, in what drove them, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
that I hope that came through.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so
I think probably what will happen with many readers is that there's a character that you are particularly interested in, but not to the detriment of the other characters. So I was fascinated by James,
mm-hmm.
and I was actually fascinated by all of those characters,
Mm-hmm.
and also the living characters as well. but just to focus on the boys for a moment, and I just wonder. I don't want to give anything away particularly, but do you see James as a tragic figure or not? Because
Yeah.
I couldn't really decide ultimately.
Well, I mean, aren't we all tragic figures? In that sense, yes. But James he starts and ends the book. I don't think that's a big spoiler, but and that was actually a suggestion from my early readers. Was like the first versions of the book were even more of a mishmash, like really all over the place, and my readers were all like, you need some kind of through line, some kind of spine that kind of gives the reader a baseline that we can follow throughout, and then you can kind of go wild around that. And so James became that. We start the book with him in what is his present day, and then it ends with him as well, and it goes through kind of the last 20 or so years of his life, and he's one of the living characters, and he is the one who's obsessed with the smiley face killers, and he's convinced that this young man that he had this romantic relationship with, who's never been found, he's kind of looking to the smiley face as like killers as like an answer, like a reason, like it's hoping for closure.
Yeah.
Exactly. And that's another kind of thing I was trying to deal with, is like our obsession with true crime in this country and whatever the world, and like how it's so much about like wanting a rational answer, even if it's this crazy rational answer, like smiley face killers, like a network of killers for 30 years who've been targeting people and never been caught. Like if you're trying to organize a brunch, you can't, like it's hard to organize a brunch with 3 people. You're not going to organize 30 years of mass murder and not be found. Anyway, that's beside the point. So anyway, it's so absurd, but it's like, it's persistent, I think, because there are so many people who've lost people in this situation, who are clinging to some kind of answer, and when there's often no answer, and that's what I wanted to get at with James in particular, was that kind of obsession, and also he was closeted when he was having this relationship with this young man. He was married. I was really interested in that dynamic, and about and they stay married. I don't think that is a huge spoiler either. And so in that sense, I think anyone who's having any kind of secret life is sort of inherently tragic in a way, although at the same time, for lots of people doing that, it's also kind of a thrill at the same. So anyway, he's all of that is wrapped up in him, and yeah. So I think that
there is a little bit of question of, and I wonder whether you would agree with this, a question of how each of these characters feels fulfilled or not. Have they really achieved, of the boys in particular I'm thinking of, they're all striving to find their place, and they don't find it because they meet their end before they have a chance to find it. But that, I think, is part of what makes the book so gripping, is that you feel such empathy toward them, even when they're doing things that you may think, or ill-advised. Or
they don't always make smart choices.
No. I mean, they're kids. They're young men, and they're driven by all sorts of interesting.
But no, I mean, that's kind of also what I was trying to illustrate, is that even when these guys are all this, like, everything's over, right? I mean, essentially their lives are over, and they still, there's this life force that they have, that they're still are like, what's going to happen to us? Like, what are we going to become? Like, they still need and strive for meaning and for purpose, you know? And I guess I was trying to just illustrate that that's something that transcends death or whatever, is that need for a purpose and for a mission and for self-development or self-actualization or whatever. And one of them in particular, like, puts all that energy in their sibling, right? And really can live almost through their sibling, and as he watches his sibling grow and change and all these things, and that gives his own life purpose, his own death purpose, actually. So I think that is the human condition, right? Is like we just always feel like there's more, you know, even when you're in the most impossible of circumstances, right? So yeah.
It was interesting that there wasn't any bitterness, I didn't feel, in your characters' hearts, you know, about their fate, too.
Yeah.
You know, they still embody that energy of young men.
Exactly.
Who are thinking ahead in a way, even though there's nothing really to look forward to.
Exactly. I mean, some are angrier than others, but for the most part, they each have a kind of acceptance that I feel like we all want to get to, you know, on some level. But they all feel like their work isn't quite done yet on some level, right? Mm-hmm. So
yeah. So the book has received many very positive reviews, which is always super fun to read. And the Boston Globe said it was mesmerizing and luminous, with an expertly braided narrative. And you've talked a little bit already about how you addressed structural issues.
Mm-hmm.
And let me just indulge my writing nerdiness for a second. How did you do that with the book that is so complex with these 8 characters? Like, how do you actually keep track of what is happening where? You know, what are your tools that you're using as a writer to keep yourself on track?
I'm really so bad at it, and I mean, I do use.
Well, not.
Right. Well, if you could see, like, it looks like. I mean, it looks like a serial killer's, like, you know, like with all the lines and all the pins. I mean, like figuratively and literally, and where the places are. I mean, I did use a lot of visual things to remind me of things. I use Scrivener, which is a tool that writers can use that helps you organize your notes and everything. But like, I really do just write by feel, and so I just would accumulate all kinds of information or scenes or ideas, and then just kind of the writing process of this was a lot of like writing a lot and then picking it apart, moving it around, reshuffling it. Oh, what happens if I put this here? What effect will that have on this? And just, it was a lot of moving around of that. So it was actually fairly easy to generate the material. It was arranging it that was the hardest part.
So were you were able to essentially keep it in your mind when you change this? Oh, that means I must change this over
Well,
here?
that was where Scrivener really helped. Yeah, because I had all these multiple versions.
Did you use the codes and everything? Because
I wasn't quite that sophisticated. Yeah. I had like version 1, version 2, version where Caleb does this. Version, it's terrible. Like, it's terrible.
Well, one of the great things about Scrivener for anybody who's interested and who's a writer is that you can move chunks around very easily, unlike in a Word document where you have to copy and paste.
Yes, and then you can print and you can like recreate compile it. That's the word they use. Compile it into a whole nother. Yeah, so that's where there are all these different versions.
So you must have had
many different versions. Many different versions. So
then on a practical level, how do you do that when you have day job and teaching and life and you know, when you're not able to just sit for 8 hours and keep it all in your head and keep it straight?
Well, you go to Key West for a month, right? Which is honestly, like, seriously, like, where, like, the 3.5 weeks or so that I was here for the Key West Literary Seminar, was really where the bulk of, like I said, about 40% of this got written, and that was really enough to kind of give it that escape velocity or whatever. And and I really do think I needed a lot. I needed to have that big chunk that I could then pick apart. So, but getting there, I think it would have been really hard to do it in small doses. I really did need that time. So yeah. Even though the book's in small pieces, I couldn't write it in small pieces, if that makes sense. Yeah. So
Let's talk a little bit about how the book reflects on our current lives and our current culture, and in particular, really interested in the way that you showed these people inhabiting your novel in the digital world, and how our social world has changed and become something that we do so much online. Tell me a little bit about that and how you developed that storyline and anything about that.
Well, I think I may have been with you the day that, or I may have seen you the day that I realized here in Key West that the way I had organized my timeline would make one of the character, or a few of the characters that I needed to follow, I would have to go into like the late 2030s.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh God, I don't want to do that.
Yeah.
Like, I don't want to imagine the near future. I just didn't want to be bothered to like come up with something like speculative and, and like, of course, like you're like, oh, it's 5 years from now, they're going to be flying cars and all these things, which is always so dumb. But at the same time, it is going to be, you have to think about the differences, but you can't think about, it can't be so ridiculous and extreme, because I am trying to write a version of realism. So I actually talked to my partner who knows a lot about, AI and about social media and all that sort of stuff. And so I was able to kind of use what he said about the next sort of phase of social media, or the way we connect online, and kind of embed a little bit of that into a part of the book. And I ended up actually liking that part more than I thought I would. It doesn't get too wacky. If you're not into that sort of thing, like, don't worry. But because ultimately, like the thriller aspects of this, it's just another piece of the world. It's not the point of it, right? But yeah, so
it's really about character.
Yes,
it's about
exactly.
what it is showing about that character.
Exactly.
It's not really as much about, oh, this is the new system that we have.
Exactly.
And here's explaining
and it allows
it's showing us
characters,
something.
yeah, and it allows characters to connect in ways that I wouldn't have been able to have them connect as well in the current mode. So it actually helped the story a lot. Almost every time I've had a block like that, or like a roadblock, I should say, or a speed bump, after the initial like, oh, I don't want to do this, like you find out, for example, like something you need a character to do they couldn't have done at this time, because if it's usually with historical fiction, right? Like and like, oh, why you need the character to have seen Phantom of the Opera that year or something, but it didn't come out till 5 years later, whatever, something stupid like that, and you think the novel can't exist unless Phantom of the Opera is in it or something. Then actually turns out that it wasn't about Phantom of the Opera. Why am I talking about Phantom of the Opera? But it wasn't about that at all. It was about the character, and it was what you needed the character to do, and there's always a better way to figure it out.
So. I wonder, how much do you think about theme when you're writing? Like, is that something that emerges as you're telling the story, or is that something that you think, oh, I really am fascinated by this and I want to explore this particular theme?
For me, definitely the themes emerged from the stories. Like, so for example, there's a lot of like what we used to call May-December romances, and now we call age gap relationships, right? And so there's a lot of age gap. In fact, every single storyline has an age gap relationship in it of some sort, whether it's, every single one of some sort. And I did not know that that's what this book was going to involve, right? That just weirdly again, I didn't want to only write about college guys and their girlfriends or boyfriends. Like, that would have been boring to me. So ultimately, it was going to happen that I was going to write about people of different generations, but I didn't quite realize how much that was going to be. And so I really had to think a lot about that, the power, which, by the way, I think the other through line with me with my books is power dynamics, like in relationships. And I was really interested in the power dynamics in age gap relationships, and who has what currency, and what we get from, what both sides get from those relationships. So that became a real theme that I was having to finesse. And then just generally the themes of like masculinity and what it's like to be a young man in this, as I said. And then, but I finished this book right before the 2024 election. So it was before people were talking like a whole lot about like the rightward, lurch of young men. So that wasn't really part of my thinking, but it just weirdly happened to dovetail with this conversation around why young American men are the way they are. And it led me to actually, like, the title didn't come from this, but someone pointed out to me, this is why it's so great to have readers. Someone pointed out to me, like, oh, when I read your book, I read the title by the time I finished it as the fact that these young men who used to always be the first seen and the most centered in our culture now feel as though they're the last seen. Like they're the people who are paid the least attention to, right? And that's not how I intended it. That's not even maybe what I believe, but it's how, that's another resonance of the title that I didn't realize. So that I thought was kind of cool.
So interesting.
Yeah.
One of my questions here, question number 8, we talk about the different meanings behind the title.
There you go. So
there we go.
done. Yes.
We have a few
Yes.
minutes still for questions. Okay,
Great.
so I do want to just say the Chicago Review of Books said, love is an answer, yet love is the greatest danger. And I was going to ask you about that. So I'll leave you with that. I think that is such a beautiful line.
Yeah, I agree.
Love is an answer, but it is the greatest danger too, because we're so vulnerable.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah, and the epigraph to the book, the amazing poem by Anne Carson, where she calls these people in the poem victims of love, and that, though I would have worked as a title, I don't like it as a title, but like it's kind of what all these guys are. On some certain level, they're all victims of love, just kind of as, again, we all are. So yeah. Okay.
But did you want to read that one little last bit? Just
So like
the last moment?
Yeah, if you don't mind. Like I hope I can find it. But I know it's going to be scary because I'm reading sort of from the end. But because we're in Key West, I just wanted to read this little part. So there's this character of Caleb, and he's the gay one, just put it that way. And he has been in the relationship with this man named James, who we've talked about, this older man, and they did have this real like love relationship. And somebody says to James, as a way of helping him to kind of get over loss, they say to him, like, when I think about the people I've lost in my life, I don't think about them as dead. I think about them as, they're busy doing something that they really loved, right? So, and that weirdly has helped me with my own losses, and particularly with my father. Like when I think of him, I'm like, I can't call him because he's at the Italian club playing bocce, or he's like cheating at cards, over at the Italian club with his buddies, and like I'll call him later, and so that weirdly like has kind of helped me, and so what they tell James about Caleb is that when you think of him, think about him being in Key West, because that's where he went. Like he's missing, it's because he just decided to check out from life and like go down to Key West, and he was very into nature and all that stuff, and he's down in Key West like on some rich guy's yacht, and he's like and he's like freeing the lobsters because he was really into he didn't think anything should be killed ever, but he would also go to McDonald's. He was sort of a hypocrite, but anyway, God, now I can't find it, so I'll just read this last part. And again, he can look in and see James, and he follows James through his whole life. So this is from Caleb's perspective. I'm not on some rich guy's yacht in Key West. I'm with James in Raleigh. I think it's Raleigh. In the bedroom of his first floor apartment with the cracked mirror and the duck pond. The drapes are pulled shut across sliding doors that lead to the patio. Light forces itself around the edges of the drapes on all sides. The TV is on. James is propped up on pillows on his side of the bed, the right, next to the nightstand, crowded with 3 pairs of eyeglasses, half-finished crossword puzzles printed out, pencils, a pencil sharpener, pill bottles, tubes of lip balm, a cell phone plugged into its charger, and empty plates and mugs. He's wearing my old Earth Day t-shirt, frayed around the neck, yellowed in the pits. Sorry, I'm skipping over the part that is a potential spoiler. Okay. You might think guys like Matt, Steven, Leo, and me have nothing better to do these days than follow our people around. But that's not true for all of us. We get busy. We have a lot to go over with each other, with ourselves. The choices we made, the choices our families made for us, our countries, our so-called friends. Remembering it all, putting it in order, shouting it over the noise. It's work. I'm not Leo. Sometimes I can't stay in the dream. Sometimes James slips my mind. Sometimes I try to force him out of my mind. But I'm like the drapes in this room. I can't block all of him. What I'm trying to say is that the street goes both ways. They come to us too. James, Lori, Monica, Leo, our people. When they ache for us so badly, it nearly knocks them down. We feel that ache too, like it's pulling at us from our guts. And that's when we go to them. We walk behind them, sit beside them, try to right them in their chairs. I wish we could tell them this, but some things are impossible to say. So I'll leave that there. Yeah. I had to read the Key West part. Yeah, I mean, it was a tiny little bit, but yeah.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Katrin. It's such a pleasure to do this with you, and thank you all so much for coming.